start today by asking all of you to think about all the ways that you interact with software every day. And if you're anything like me, you probably think, well, I got a computer, I got a phone, I use software all day long. But put aside the computer for a moment and think about all the other ways that you might have interacted with software already today. Maybe you had an alarm clock by your bed to wake you up in the morning. The lights that you may have turned on in your home almost surely were controlled by software. You may have ridden a car here to this event. The car probably had software in it. There was software in the stoplights that controlled the flow of traffic. That credit card transaction you might have used to pick up a cup of coffee on the way used software. On a day in the office, you might have a badge that lets you through a gate, certainly controlled by software. The elevator in your office, the elevator here, if you're used it, controlled by software. So software controls all of these basic elements of our everyday life, and that is without ever using a computer. So software truly makes the world go round. And the problem is that software is under attack. For example, recently, one of the world's largest shipping companies was brought offline in only 7 minutes by a cyber attack. Required a lot of work to bring their systems back up and running and resulted in 250 million euros in losses. And that's only one example of many nightmare scenarios that are already occurring today. For example, 16 hospitals across the United Kingdom were taken offline by the WannaCry attack, resulted in more than 19,000 appointments being canceled. Ukraine lost power twice during very harsh winters due to a cyber attack, and similar attempts at attacks have occurred right here in Ireland. A large European metal producer had to take multiple plants offline due to a cyber attack recently. A big attack group stole $80 million through fraudulent wire transfers from a bank in Asia, and also stole tens of millions of euros through unauthorized withdrawals from automated teller systems in 30 countries all on the same day. And as we're all aware, we've seen elections impacted by cyber attacks across the world, as well as by disinformation campaigns launched through social media. So the world of cybersecurity has become about much more than just protecting computers. It's really about protecting power and healthcare and transportation and financial systems and our elections, our fundamental way of being. And so at Symantec, we see our mission as making the world a safer place. So how do we keep up with the hundreds, literally hundreds of millions of attacks every single day from thousands of attackers? And remember, attackers have a lot of advantages over the defenders. They can, for example, test their software out against commercial security products to make sure they evade it. They have the element of surprise. And maybe most importantly, attackers only have to be right once. They only have to breach an organization's defenses one time to launch an attack, while the defenders, the security products, have to be right every single time. The job of keeping up with all of these threats used to be a lot easier back when I started, and that's because there just weren't a lot of threats. And what we did is we could write a signature for every single threat in the world that would identify and remove it. And this approach was actually pretty effective at keeping people safe. The problem is that this threat landscape has changed massively. There are now literally hundreds of millions of threats every single day. And our challenge is, how do we find and protect the world from all of these threats where we will never possibly have the time to create a signature or a fingerprint? So we first started thinking about this problem a few years ago as the threat landscape just exploded. And we wondered if we could somehow leverage our more than 100 million users. So our users are downloading massive numbers of files from the internet all the time. And many of these files we can identify as being either good or bad, But there are always going to be huge numbers of them that no security company, not Symantec, not anybody else, is ever going to see. And the question is, if we will never see these files, we have no idea what they do, how can we possibly determine whether they're good or bad? So a thought was, maybe we could somehow ask our users to help us rate these files, somehow leverage the wisdom of the crowd, sort of like Yelp for computer programs. And as you might imagine, this approach didn't work at all. Our users are not security experts. They don't want to spend their time rating files. They're looking for us to do this. And then in looking through some of our telemetry a little more deeply, we found something sort of interesting, which was that we have a certain fraction, a meaningful fraction of users who seem to never get infected. They seem to have a sixth sense for staying really clean out on the internet. And we have another, and so that's useful to us because they're good at predicting good software. We had another group of users that, and we didn't know why, and we don't know who they are, but out on the internet, they constantly get into trouble. Out on the internet, they have really bad hygiene. They don't necessarily look like that, just to be clear, but they have very bad hygiene. Again, this is useful because they're good at finding bad software. And this was an interesting discovery. It gave us some ideas for how we could rate every single computer program on the internet without ever seeing it. So to give you an idea of how this works, let's imagine a thought experiment where we have 100 million willing volunteers who we've signed up, all of whom install lots of software on the internet. And now let's suppose that 2 brand new files have been discovered. We don't know what these files do. Maybe we know their name, maybe we know how big they are, but nothing else. How can we possibly know whether the files are good or bad? Well, why don't we look at which of these files are adopted by our set of volunteers? So if this first file, file A, is used by lots and lots of people who always download good software, who hardly ever get infected, that tells you statistically that file is likely to be good. And similarly, if the other file is mostly used by people who have been infected a lot in the past, that tells you statistically that file is likely to be bad. And so by leveraging all of this information across our entire user base, along with some complex big data algorithms, we're able to now automatically derive safety ratings for every file on the internet and uncover entirely new attacks. And we call this approach reputation-based security. So reputation-based security is great for blocking new malicious software. However, the problem is attacks have continued to gain in complexity and in sophistication. In fact, most of today's targeted complex cyber attacks no longer even leverage malicious software. They use legitimate programs that are part of an operating system installation, and so it makes it very difficult for them to be found. Or many of them use social engineering techniques to fool unwitting victims into providing access to targeted systems. These attacks are often made up, as it turns out, of a lot of seemingly minor events. So there may be a slightly suspicious email over here, a connection to a new website over here, a failed login to the finance database over here, and so forth. And each of one of these events on its own is not useful to the attacker, but when they occur in a specific sequence, they can lead to a major breach that can cause loss of sensitive information, disruption of critical services, even direct sabotage of a victim's operations. So today, it is no longer enough for our security technologies to simply identify and block malicious files or artifacts. Discovering these newest threats is more like finding that needle, that little needle in a haystack. So to address this problem, what we've done is to develop entirely new algorithms and technologies based on artificial intelligence and something called deep learning, which allows us to mimic the human brain with a computer. And so now, where a security analyst may have had to painstakingly review massive amounts of data in order to uncover a new attack, our artificial intelligence systems, which are completely automated, continuously comb through massive amounts of data automatically and immediately pinpointing new attacks that would otherwise be undetectable. So our systems, for example, have found entirely new attacks that could have turned off electricity in many parts of the United States as well as countries in Europe. These systems have uncovered attacks that could have stolen significant amounts of national defense information. These attacks have uncovered, these systems, pardon me, have uncovered attacks that could have even repositioned, literally repositioned, critical government satellites. So today, our artificial intelligence systems are scanning continuously through 11 petabytes of telemetry, looking at billions of combinations of events and working to connect the dots so that we can find the latest generation of cyber attack. And just to provide some perspective, if you had 11 petabytes of music and you wanted to listen to all of it, it would take you just over 20,000 years. So you'd have to really like music. Today, we are blocking 142 million threats every single day, many of which have the ability to destroy the fabric of our lives. So in addition to focusing on blocking threats, another area of focus and importance to us is to work with law enforcement, both to help bring attackers to justice as well as to completely disrupt and shut down their campaigns. And I'd like to talk about one particular such event we worked on that just came to a conclusion recently. It actually started way back in 2007 when we first started tracking an attack group called BayRob. And just to put the time frame in perspective, 2007 is the year the first iPhone was introduced. It's the year the final book in the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was published. It's also the year that the Dublin Port Tunnel first opened to traffic. And in fact, it's the year that construction started on this very theater where we're sitting today. So the BayRob group operated by posting fake car auctions on eBay, completely fictitious. And they would use various mechanisms to encourage people to pay for these cars, and then they would just steal their money. It was all a scam. And over the course of many years, it's estimated that the group stole upwards of 100 million euros from victims, all the while funding a lavish lifestyle of cars, homes, great trips, and so on. So one of our own researchers, Liam O'Murku, who grew up very close to here, in fact, in County Kildare, and started his Symantec career right here at our office in Dublin, started looking at this group in 2007 and tracked them tirelessly, uncovering their webs of deception over time. And in fact, whenever Liam came across the information of somebody who was about to be cheated by this group, he would stop his work and he would call them up personally and tell them that the whole thing was a scam. So through Liam's perseverance and his ingenuity, the attackers were eventually traced to Romania, and through working with law enforcement, the three leaders of the BayRob gang were arrested in Bucharest in Romania at the very end of 2016, and they were extradited to the city of Cleveland in the United States, which was the site of the first victim. So one of the attackers, there were three of them, decided to make a plea deal. He is due to be sentenced later this month. The other two attackers went on trial, each charged with 21 criminal counts. And Liam O'Murku, who had tracked these attackers tirelessly for the 9 years since the campaign started until the day they were arrested, finally saw them face to face when he testified back in March at their trial over 4 days of testimony. And the verdicts just came in about a month ago. The two who went to trial were both convicted on all 21 criminal counts, will be sentenced a little later this summer and could face from 20 to 30 years in prison. So this is just one example of a successful interaction we've had with law enforcement. We've worked to take down rings of attackers who've stolen billions of euros through sending fraudulent emails. We help secure, again, working very closely with law enforcement, the conviction of a hacker who had created a new online service for malware authors, which was used to steal a reported 20 billion euros from victims. Here's a letter from the National Crime Agency in the UK, who we work with and have traded a lot of information with around complex attacks. And this has all led to the arrests of 150, and now more than 150 cyber criminals globally, in which the attackers have been arrested. We've also completely shut down their operations, thereby better protecting our world. So, and thank you. And thanks to the many collaborators who've helped and worked on this. So the stakes in the world of cybersecurity have evolved and changed massively over the years, and we've had to change the way we work right alongside. We have gone from the days of writing signatures for a very small number of threats, to reputation-based security, to artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms that sift through massive amounts of data to help us block 142 million attacks every single day. We work with law enforcement to help bring attackers to justice and to shut down their operations, leading to the arrests of 150 cyber criminals. And with all of that, we continue to try to set our sights even higher. So remember, I talked about that shipping company that had been crippled by the cyber attack in only 7 minutes. And that attack was called NotPetya. And here is some of the software code that is in that attack, NotPetya. And these attackers who created the attack actually knew that they could not bypass our software. So they put a couple specific lines of code in the threat to check if any Symantec software was running on a targeted machine. And if they did find Symantec software, the threat didn't even try to run. It completely gave up. And so for us, that was really a holy grail. That is really what we strive for every single day in our mission to keep electricity running, to keep hospitals open, to protect financial transactions, to safeguard transportation, to uphold the integrity of our elections. This is how Symantec helps keep the world a safer place. Thank you.